Good morning, church. This morning I'll be reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, starting at the beginning, going through verse 14. John chapter 1, I'll be reading from the Holman Christian Standard. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, and apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. Life was in him, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man named John who was sent from God. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. The true light, who gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was created through him, yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own people, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, he gave them the right to be children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. The Word became flesh and took up residence among us. We observed his glory, the glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Last week we started talking about the importance of shepherding as a way to think about leadership. As I was preparing this week, something came to me, something useful this time. and I've asked Ken Wilson, who often will be the first one to tell me, I think you missed something there. And I appreciate that, Brother Ken. So I cleared this with him first before I'm going live with it. But I want you to think about it. Is there any other leadership model we find in Scripture other than shepherding? The model of the shepherd. Ken said it is at least the primary model that we read in Scripture about leadership. So one of the things I want you to do over the next couple of weeks as we talk about shepherding is look and see how many times the word is used in Scripture. We often talk about and read about how God is our shepherd. Psalm 23, the Lord is our shepherd. Moses was a shepherd. Shepherding was a very important part of the ancient Near Eastern world, still is today. So you do that homework and let me know how significant you discover it to be. Because I find it very significant and very important. And the idea behind shepherding is not sometimes we might go from shepherd to thinking, we're talking about men's leadership. And I think we are. Church leadership, absolutely. Women, I think it comes most naturally to women. The idea of being gentle and nurturing. If you want me to do that, you got to beat me a couple of times with the with the shepherd's staff to get this through to me. It is very natural. Some homes are shepherded by two parents. Some homes are shepherded by one parent. And either way you look at that, the primary thing to understand is that if Jesus is not my shepherd, if Jesus is not Lenita's shepherd, if Jesus is not your shepherd, you're going to miss this. You're going to miss this. Even Jesus himself, describing his role in our lives, he says, I am the good shepherd. John 10:14. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. And really it's that aspect of knowing that we're going to talk about today. Last week I introduced the 4 foundational principles of shepherding. Does anybody remember what they are? You're going to say knowing, and I'm going to say, okay, you got that one. So let's get to that. Knowing is the first one. The next one is leading. Someone's got it written down. The next one is protecting. And the final one is providing. Now these are not gender exclusive. This is something every one of us needs to put into practice if we are in some sort of position of leadership. I find this in the writings of how some businesses are figuring this out. And they're turning from the form of business leadership that they had to something more like this. I remember this by KLPP. You know, these words that can help me to remember these 4 functions as I fulfill my role as a shepherd in my world. And they represent fundamental human needs. That's why they resonate with us. And I think that's why God, when he talks about leadership, he talks about it in terms of shepherding, because they resonate with our basic needs. We need to be known. That is a basic human need. We see that from the very smallest human, from a baby. If a baby doesn't come to know its parents, it struggles to thrive. And as life goes on, knowing is really important. If someone says, hey, do you want to go to this event? One of my first questions anyways is, who's going to be there? Because I want to know that this is going to be a safe place for me to go. So it's just the basic human need. The basic human needs are communicated in these functions: knowing, leading, protecting, providing. And it's very different from a lot of the leadership models that we see in society. A real popular model in our society is autocratic. That's top-down leadership. That is one person or one ideology in charge of everything. That is what led to a lot of the revolutions in the 1800s. Is prior to democracy getting its foothold, the most prevalent form of government leadership was a monarchy. That's a person, just by virtue of their birth, are put in charge of your life. How do you like that? Let's fight a war. The other one is democratic. Now you may say, whoa, back up off that one, brother. It really becomes mob rule. If guiding principles are not there to direct the relationships between people, it becomes mob rule. And we saw that in the colonies, in America. We're fighting a revolutionary war for not just democratic principles, but basically the formulation of democratic principles with boundaries. But what were they doing over in France? They were cutting heads off. They're going to get rid of the monarchy that way. But you know what they ended up with after all of that? They went back to monarchy because mob rule without boundaries doesn't work. Shepherding is kind of a theocratic model. And that doesn't necessarily mean God is in charge. But as I've already said, it seems to be a primary model that God teaches us in Scripture. And it's not based on what the autocrat wants or the Democrat wants, but the demands of the covenant. Now, I am thankful that we have a democracy. It's a constitutional democracy, which means there are boundaries within that democracy. That's a biblical idea. And if you add the idea of covenant to it, that means I'm agreeing to live in a certain way, to enjoy the privileges of this form of government. Does that make sense? If we don't agree to a set of standards, it becomes anarchy. It becomes mob rule. We don't have a stable society to live in. Because if I, as part of that mob, think something else is more important and I violate the covenant that you should be able to live your life without the negative influence from other people. Shouldn't you? Yes. But if you decide, just because your rights are viewed as more important than my rights, you take something away from me, then you violated the covenant. That's why this role is so important. This idea is so important to a free society. That means we live within this society in agreement. That's what a true theocracy is. That's what God was trying to do with Israel, trying to get them to agree to live according to God's ways. The covenant motto, I am your God, you are my people. That's a volunteer thing. That's an agreement thing. That's something we can all agree to and make the most of. In our homes, I think this is such a significant way to accomplish the goals that we have as parents, as leaders, as shepherds in our home. Is that there's an agreement, and just like God is going to be faithful to His part of the covenant, I need to be faithful to my part of the covenant. And just like with the nation of Israel, when the people gave up and decided they weren't going to live according to the covenant, things didn't go well for them. So we want to talk a little bit then this morning about knowing in regards to shepherd leadership. And that knowing is brought about from what is called the principle of presence. Now, what I mean by that, the principle of presence, is exactly what God did for us. The passage that Jeff read, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Word, that term, word, brings to mind knowledge, wisdom, communication, a sharing of knowledge. And God tried that. He tried to bring about a society based on a giving of the law, a giving of knowledge. We understand that as the covenant relationship he gave to the Israelites, known as the law of Moses. But it says in Hebrews that they broke my covenant. So there was something wrong with it. He said there was something wrong with it. They broke my covenant. And so God took a different approach. Instead of just telling us what to do, what did he do in the person of Jesus? He showed us what to do. He came down and invaded our space so that we could see, not just hear, but see what it is that he's talking about. There is very little difference between the terms of the covenant in the Old Testament and the terms of the covenant in the New Testament. It's still the same. Here's my word. I give you these blessings. You obey it. You receive these blessings. Very little difference there. What is different? The presence of God among us. Emmanuel, God with us. That is the principle of presence. Verse 14 says in John chapter 1, the Word became flesh and lived and took up residence among us. And we observed his glory. We saw it. We were able to see God. We were able to see what he wanted us, what living out the covenant looks like. He didn't just say, do this. He demonstrated it. He went before us. That's what shepherds do. They lead. They show the way. And the sheep follow because they know that the shepherd knows them. They know his voice because the things that he says resonates with who they are and what they need. They're not just random commands that you're supposed to follow, jump through these hoops, and do what you're supposed to do. The rules, the stipulations of the covenant, the rules of the covenant are there to bless our lives, to make life better for us, to make life come out the way it is and the way it should be, the good things that it should be. God never meant for us to live in some of the messes that we've created in our own lives. And one day, and when that day comes, and maybe it has come, when I agree that I've made a mess of my life because I've either been autocratic or democratic. But now my orientation is theocratic. And I take part in a covenant where I agree. But the shepherd has made it an environment where I can thrive and I can grow and I can become something greater than I would without having that covenant. Make no mistake, there's a lot of people who say they're fine without God, but they are not fine without God. They make you think they're fine without God, but they're not. They're missing some very significant principles to live their life according to. And so that's why they either take charge or the people take charge. Because you have to have rule. You have to have rule. So we see these principles of knowing played out in the life of Jesus. And the first is, as I think about how I lead in the environment that I'm called to lead, I think first about quantity time. You thought I was going to say quality time, didn't you? Yeah. Because that's what we say. Oh no, quantity has nothing to do with it. It has to be quality time. If you make it quality time, then you'll be fine. No, quality time doesn't build relationship. There's very little that is shared if my goal is quality time. That almost means I'm just putting in enough to get by here, you guys. And I'm going to jam it full of stuff so that you know without a doubt I love you. But that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us. What really helps us is just to think about, to illustrate this, to think about, remember when you were courting your special one. And you weren't okay with just quality time. And it seemed like there was never enough time. As a matter of fact, you spent as much time as possible with that person. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they say, once you catch what you were going for, I don't have to shower anymore, okay? No. And it seemed that during that time, you were very close. You were so close. Some of us long for those days. And the reason why it seemed like you were so close is you were so close. You spent time with that person. All of the time that you could muster, that you thought you could afford. You would give up other things to be with that person. That's what God did for us. That's part of knowing, by spending time, by spending quantity time with that person. So in a family, in a relationship, that means I'm going to dedicate some time specifically for this relationship. Now that kind of may look like quality time, but oftentimes if you have dedicated times within a relationship and it's a regular thing, it adds up. But what happens during that time is you are sharing knowledge. You are not just getting to know that person, you are living according to the knowledge that you've already gathered about that person. You know what that person needs. You know what makes them tick. And so in the relationship, as you have dedicated time, you are feeding into that. You need to have dedicated time with your spouse. Special times where you may talk about things that are going on, or you may talk about nothing. You may talk about what interests you. You may talk about what's going on in the world today. Not as a way to prove that you have superior knowledge and you're going to debate your spouse, put them down, gotcha, got you on that point. No, it is a sharing of personal information. If you have kids in your family, if you have children, you have to have dedicated time with each child. Now, if you just have one child, that's a cakewalk right there, right? No, but it's easier than if you have 11. But that doesn't mean that principle is any less valuable for 11, for 1, for 2, for 4. Dedicated time for each child. And then dedicated time for the family. If a family is going to be functional, see, there's the operative word, functional, that this thing is working. There has to be times when there are all hands on deck. There has to be family meetings. There needs to be times when everybody's together and everybody's either getting on the same page, reinforcing the same page, or trying to figure out what my role is on this page. Do your kids know what you expect of them? Now you may say, yeah, I told them what to expect. But that doesn't do it. Because connected to this idea of quantity time is also a couple of mindsets where there's with my spouse. It's the practice of partnership. That means we are working together. We see ourselves as two parts of the same puzzle. A lot of families are autocratic. And that may accomplish something, but it's not God's idea. But some people think it is. Some people think that this is God's idea. Autocratic, God in charge. But God, He doesn't do that. He's always tried to help us to understand, and especially demonstrated through Jesus. And though in the Old Testament it wasn't as bold, an invasion into the life of people. But let's take the Exodus. Did God demonstrate His presence through those things? Absolutely. So God has always interjected Himself, fulfilling this principle of presence. It's without a doubt in the story of Christ. But that creates within us a partnership. That's our motive. That's our goal. That's what we're working toward is this partnership to live that out. We're working together to be a shepherding team. Not autocratic, but covenantal. We even use that word for marriage, don't we? The marriage covenant. Does that mean I'm in charge and you do what I say? No. Scripture doesn't even teach that. When the man realizes he's by himself, what does God do? He demonstrates it to him in Genesis 3. You're alone. Genesis 2. You're alone. You're by yourself. And then he creates someone to complement him. That means the other side of this puzzle. That doesn't mean someone I'm over now. Or even democracy in families. That doesn't work well. But I know there are many books written on democracy in families. But it really has to be a covenant. From the principle of a shepherd creating the environment of knowing, leading, providing, protecting. You're creating that environment and you're inviting your children into this environment. And the husband and wife are doing that together. Now you say, well, I'm not married right now. Then it's you and God doing this together. Okay, you're not alone. You're not without a team. And the accountability is still the same, whether I'm married or single. The accountability is the same. We look to God for our direction, for our guidance, for the principles by which we live our lives. We are committed in this partnership of creating the environment of knowing, leading, providing, and protecting. And then also related to quantity time is the practice of participation. That means we do things together. And this maximizes and allows you to capitalize on this idea of participation. This is real important for kids. Again, a lot of times kids are just told what they're going to do, or it's not the best thing to allow families to revolve around school stuff. Because that's not a strong enough goal to keep you guys together when stress comes. As a matter of fact, it becomes a distraction when there is stress. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on that. And the family disintegrates because everybody's focusing on their own thing. There's the democratic model. Observe that. Notice that. If we are having quantity time, then we will have quality communication. In one of the books I've read recently, said that if there is a breakdown in a marriage, it is the all too common result of a breakdown in communication. Quality communication means two-way communication, not just one way, not just I'm telling you what, I'm telling you what. No, I'm telling you what. No, I'm telling you what. It is a two-way communication, a sharing of ideas, a sharing of knowledge. Some couple may say, we fight about everything. Why do you fight about everything? If you fight about everything. It's because you don't have shared values on these things. You don't know. You're probably told what to do. And so if there's an autocratic leadership style in your home, and just let me say, an autocrat can be any gender. Can be a man or a woman, right? There's no exclusive claim to autocratic leadership. And so if there's this one-way communication, I'm telling you what to do, no, I'm telling you what to do, you're not going to have shared values. If you fight over everything, that means you're not sharing anything. You don't have shared values. Because we've forgotten the covenant thing. I read something the other day. At first, I thought it was absurd. Basically, the guy who wrote the book said, in marriage, stop talking about covenant because people don't get it. So talk about something else. Anything but this till death do us part thing, because that's not the way it happens oftentimes. And I want to be sensitive because I know things happen. But if you've been through that, you know what the breakdown is. There are some covenant stipulations that have been broken. It's a covenant between a man and a woman. I'll do this. I'll do this. And we work together. But when that breaks down, and it's in communication where it begins. If that breaks down, it's because either we don't have shared values or somebody is violating shared values. So that is the real purpose of two-way communication. And it's complicated by a lot of things. Okay, Ray, are you ready? Okay, so I want to show you a short, it's a Geico commercial, but sometimes commercials drive you crazy, but sometimes they hit it. And this one kind of hits it for me. The relationship between
Could switching to Geico really save you 15% or more on car insurance? Was Abe Lincoln honest?
Does this dress make my backside look big?
Perhaps it will.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
You got to jump on that stuff. You can't let that hang because it suggests you're not being truthful. You're trying to think of something nice to say. But I know sometimes we have our, what's it called? Situational ethics in communication. If I say this and it hurts your feelings, then I won't say it. But the hesitation and the untruthfulness of it can erode at trust. And that is so significant for two-way communication, is trust. Truthfulness and trust go together. Paul tells us in Ephesians 4:29, and I think I have it. Do I have it here? Yeah, there it is. Okay. So you've heard this verse before. This is quality communication 101. No foul language, and that word, I've got an underlined, foul language. That's inappropriate. That could be something that is morally inappropriate or, truthfully inappropriate. However you want to define that, but it's just inappropriate communication. No inappropriate communication is to come from your mouth, but only what is good for building up someone in need so that it gives grace to those who hear. See, that is the basic statement of communication in any leadership team, is that you're being truthful and your words are not bringing things down. Your words are building one another up. We need that all the time. We need that all the time. We need that all the time. We need quality communication that brings one another up instead of putting one another down. And even with Honest Abe, you can say something in a way that's nice, if it's difficult. You can work through truth, but you can't work through lies. Only that which builds up. A researcher, John Gottman from University of Washington, had done some research on couples and communication. Someone else took that research and wrote a book called Blink, and I didn't write that name down. I forget who that was, but the idea of Blink is that spontaneous communication. Do you ever say something you wish you could take back, but it just came out? It just came out because that's really how you feel. And you couldn't think fast enough of how to filter that. And he said, I can tell by listening to couples talk whether or not their marriage is going to work, by how they talk to one another. And he's got a 95% success rating. And he says, and I wonder if he's coming from a religious perspective, because he says, he calls these the 4 horsemen of communication saboteurs. And of course, 4 horsemen is something from the book of Revelation. And the 4 horsemen is not good. It's war. It's an illustration of war. An illustration of the fact that humanity seems to think it operates best when we're killing one another. And this is the result of it. So he's saying there are things that kill our communication. These things are a war on communication. Defensiveness. And I'm just going to leave those words. You need to define them. Stonewalling. Criticism. And contempt. Which of these do you think is worse? John Gottman said contempt. Because that communicates hostility. That communicates issues. That communicates the fact that at some point we stopped working together. And now, the very presence of you causes me deep loathing. That's what that is. So pay attention to these. There may be a progression here. Defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, and contempt. But they will always sabotage your relationship and your communication. And just to look at this again, Paul says, no foul language is to come from your mouth, but only that which is good for building up someone in need. And that's why I repeated that. We are always in need. There are things that are constantly attacking us. Life is constantly attacking us. Sometimes people are attacking us to demean us, to put us in our place. We're always dealing with that stuff. And so our responsibility on a team, whether it's me as a husband, or me as a dad, or me as a friend, or me as a minister, is to build you up because I know you're in need. That's my responsibility. Okay. So that, underlining in the Bible, so that it gives grace to those who hear. Now, when it says gives grace, doesn't that assume I'm in need of grace? You see where I'm going with this? I'm not always the best person that I need to be. I don't always say the right thing. I don't always do the right thing. That's kind of a human thing. It's not just me, so don't say, ha ha, I knew it. It's you too. This is the human situation. We are always in need of grace. Always in need of grace. And if I am a recipient of grace, see, and this gets back to my faith. If I am a recipient of grace, then I need to be a dispenser of grace. Because it was my mess that God fixed through the cross. And so that makes me not perfect, but qualified. Means I practice the principle of presence. Striving for quantity, time, quality communication. And that's what makes me a qualified leader. It's because I first say, the Lord is my shepherd. And when you read the 23rd Psalm, it spells out perfectly and deeply and significantly and profoundly the covenant relationship that we have with God the Father, with God our shepherd. His blessings, and because of His blessings, I am fearless. I am fearless. Even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I am fearless. So in addition to looking for that word shepherd over the next couple of weeks, spend some time in Psalm 23, as that spells out what qualifies you to be a shepherd leader.